The first thing I noticed was that she was kneeling in front of my wife's grave as if she belonged there. The second thing I noticed was that she was crying harder than I had cried at the funeral. It was just after 11 on a bright Saturday morning, the kind of day my wife used to love, when sunlight spilled through the maple branches and turned the cemetery grass almost painfully green. I had come carrying a small bunch of white tulips because it had been exactly 3 years since Maren died, and even after all that time, I still didn't know what else a man was supposed to bring to the person who had taken half his life with her when she left. But someone was already there. A woman I had never seen before was crouched beside Maren's headstone, one hand pressed against the engraved granite and the other covering her mouth as her shoulders shook. She looked to be in her early 30s, maybe younger than me by 5 or 6 years. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose knot, and a pale blue cardigan hung awkwardly around her shoulders as though she had dressed in a hurry. A small canvas bag rested beside her in the grass. For several seconds, I simply stood there. Then she heard my footsteps. She looked over her shoulder. The moment she saw me, her face changed. Not recognition exactly. Relief. She stood too quickly, wiped her eyes with both hands, and whispered the sentence that would change everything I thought I knew about my wife. He told me to find you. Before we go any further, if you believe kindness can survive grief, that people deserve second chances, and that sometimes the most important parts of someone's life are the parts we never got to see, please like this video, comment below, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to Lifeline Vibes. My name is Callum, and for 3 years after my wife's death, I lived like a man who had forgotten he was still alive. Maren had been 37 when a sudden aneurysm took her on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. There had been no warning, no long illness, no chance to prepare. That morning, she had complained that I had left coffee grounds on the counter again. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, reminded me to call the plumber, and promised she would pick up Thai food on the way home. By sunset, I was sitting beneath fluorescent hospital lights while a doctor explained that my wife was gone. People tell you grief comes in waves. Mine didn't. Mine came like weather that never changed. For the first year, friends kept calling. My older brother, Soren, invited me to dinner every Sunday. Neighbors left casseroles on my porch. Maren's mother checked on me twice a day until I began pretending I was busy so she would stop hearing the emptiness in my voice. Eventually, people returned to their lives, because that is what living people are supposed to do. I returned to our house. Every morning, I woke on the same side of the bed. Every evening, I ate over the kitchen sink. And once a month, usually around midday when the cemetery was quiet, I visited Maren. So when that stranger said someone had told her to find me, my first reaction wasn't curiosity. It was anger. I asked her who she was. She looked down at the grave instead of answering. Her name, she finally said, was Nessa Vale. The name meant nothing to me. I asked who had told her to find me. That was when she reached into her canvas bag and pulled out an envelope. My name was written across the front. Callum. One word. But I knew the handwriting immediately. Maren's handwriting. I stopped breathing. There are moments when the mind refuses to accept what the eyes are seeing. My knees felt strangely weak. The cemetery around me seemed to tilt, sunlight flashing between branches, birds calling somewhere beyond the stone wall, every ordinary detail suddenly offensive because nothing should have been ordinary anymore. I took the envelope from Nessa. The paper was yellowed slightly at the edges. I asked her where she had gotten it. She said she had received it 2 weeks earlier from a man named Hollis Van, a retired attorney who had recently entered hospice care. Hollis had handled private legal work for Maren years before her death. Before becoming too ill to continue working, he had contacted Nessa and given her 3 things: my letter, the cemetery address, and a key. Then Nessa handed me a small brass key. I stared at it in my palm. She explained that Hollis had told her Maren left instructions that if something ever happened to her, Nessa should wait until Hollis believed she was ready, then come here, find Maren's husband, and give him the envelope. I asked the question that had already started burning inside me. Ready for what? Nessa's eyes filled again. To tell me who she was. I should have opened the letter right there. Instead, I told her I needed space. I stepped away, walked past 3 rows of graves, and sat on an old wooden bench beneath a sycamore tree. My hands trembled as I slid one finger beneath the envelope flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Maren had written it. There was no doubt. She began by apologizing. She wrote that if I was reading the letter, then something had happened before she had been brave enough to tell me a part of her past she had kept hidden. Then came the sentence that made my vision blur. Nessa was her daughter. Not my daughter. Maren's. I read the line 4 times. The cemetery vanished around me. Before Maren and I met, when she was 19 years old, she had given birth to a baby girl. She had never told me. The letter explained that Maren had grown up in a home far harsher than the version she shared with me. Her father had been controlling, unpredictable, and obsessed with appearances. When she became pregnant during her first year of college, he told her she had disgraced the family. The baby's father disappeared before the birth. Maren, frightened and broke, was pressured into placing the child for adoption. She had signed the papers. Then regretted it every day afterward. Years later, after she had rebuilt her life, she quietly began searching. That search eventually led her to Hollis, who helped locate the adoptive family but warned Maren that contact had to be handled carefully. Nessa had grown up loved and safe. Maren didn't want to storm into her life simply because guilt had become unbearable. So she waited. And watched from a distance. Not in some intrusive way. She followed what little public information she could find. School achievements. A university graduation announcement. A local newspaper photograph when Nessa helped organize a charity food drive. Then Maren met me. We married. And apparently, she had tried many times to tell me. In the letter, she wrote that every year she delayed made the truth harder to confess. She feared I would see her differently. She feared I would ask why she had hidden something so enormous. Most of all, she feared approaching Nessa, being rejected, and then carrying that rejection into our marriage. I reached the final paragraph. Maren wrote that if Hollis had decided to deliver the letter, it meant Nessa had chosen to know about her. Then she asked me to do one thing. Not forgive her. Not defend her. Not replace her. Just listen to Nessa if she needed someone who knew the woman her mother had become. When I looked up, Nessa was still standing beside the grave. She hadn't moved closer. She was giving me exactly what I had asked for. Space. I walked back slowly. The first thing I said was something I regretted immediately. I told her Maren should have told me. Nessa nodded. Then she said Maren should have told her too. That sentence broke through my anger. Because until that moment, I had been thinking of myself as the person betrayed by a secret. I had not thought about the woman standing in front of me. Nessa had learned only 8 months earlier that she was adopted. Her adoptive mother had died the previous winter, and while sorting through documents, she had discovered the original records. Her adoptive father, who was suffering from early dementia, had been unable to explain much, but one name appeared repeatedly in a sealed file. Maren Elise Reeve. Nessa contacted Hollis. That was when she learned her biological mother had already been dead for almost 3 years. She had found Maren too late. The words hit me harder than I expected. Too late. Grief has a strange way of creating instant recognition between people. You can meet someone whose life is completely different from yours, but if both of you have stood at the same locked door and realized the person on the other side will never open it again, there is something you understand about each other without explanation. Nessa sat on the grass beside Maren's grave. After a moment, I sat too. She told me she had spent months imagining what Maren might have been like. The records told her almost nothing. A birth date. A signature. A hospital. Hollis had shared only what Maren had authorized him to share. So Nessa had come to ask me. What kind of woman had her mother become? At first, I couldn't answer. How do you summarize a life? I looked at Maren's name carved into stone and began with something small. I told Nessa that Maren hated bananas but loved banana bread, which made absolutely no sense. I told her she sang while loading the dishwasher but always forgot half the lyrics. I told her she could walk into a crowded room and find the loneliest person within 5 minutes. I told her she carried granola bars in her handbag because she was convinced someone, somewhere, would eventually need one. Nessa laughed. It was the first time I heard it. Then she covered her mouth and started crying again. So I kept talking. I told her Maren was stubborn. Terrible with directions. Excellent with children. Incapable of passing a stray dog without talking to it. I told her she had spent 6 months secretly paying the lunch balance of a boy at the elementary school where she worked because his mother had lost her job. Nessa looked at me sharply. She asked if Maren worked at an elementary school. I said yes. She had been a school counselor for 9 years. Nessa stared at the grave. Then she told me she was a social worker specializing in children and families. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The resemblance wasn't dramatic. Nessa did not look exactly like Maren. Her face was narrower, her hair darker, and her eyes belonged to someone else. But when she listened, she tilted her head slightly to the left. Maren used to do the same thing. I felt something inside me crack open. For 3 years, I had believed Maren's story ended in a hospital room. Now a part of it was sitting beside me in the grass. The brass key led us somewhere neither of us expected. Hollis's instructions pointed to a storage unit Maren had rented under her maiden name. That afternoon, beneath a hot white sky, Nessa and I drove there in separate cars. The unit was small. Inside were 4 plastic containers, 2 cardboard boxes, and a cedar chest. Everything had been carefully labeled. Nessa. The first box contained newspaper clippings and printed photographs. Nessa at 16 receiving a scholarship. Nessa finishing college. Nessa standing with volunteers outside a community center. The second contained letters. Dozens of them. One for every birthday from age 5 onward. Maren had written to a daughter she never knew. She never mailed them. Nessa sat on the concrete floor and opened the first. I turned away. Some grief deserves privacy. She read for nearly an hour. There were letters apologizing. Letters wondering what music Nessa liked. Letters describing Maren's first apartment, her new job, the day she met me, the day we married. One letter contained a photograph from our wedding. On the back, Maren had written that she hoped someday her daughter might meet the man who made her believe she deserved a peaceful life. I had to walk outside after reading that. For years, I had been angry at Maren for dying. Then, in one morning, I became angry at her for living an entire hidden life beside me. But grief and anger are not opposites of love. Sometimes they are proof of it. Over the following weeks, Nessa and I met several times. At first, our conversations were awkward. She asked questions I didn't always know how to answer. Did Maren talk about having children? Yes. Did she ever say why we didn't? That question hurt. Maren and I had tried for years. There had been 2 miscarriages. After the second, we stopped trying. Suddenly, details from our marriage took on new meaning. The nights Maren cried more deeply than I understood. Her strange silence whenever adoption came up. The way she once told me that loving someone sometimes meant accepting that they might have a better life without you. At the time, I thought she was talking about our unborn children. Now I knew she had been talking about Nessa. I struggled with that. There were nights I lay awake feeling as though my memories had been tampered with. Was our marriage less honest than I believed? Had I truly known her? Eventually, I understood that knowing someone does not mean possessing every chapter of their life. People carry rooms inside themselves they are sometimes too frightened to open. Maren's silence had hurt me. But it had not erased 21 years of love. And Nessa taught me something else. The truth could arrive too late to change the past and still arrive in time to change the future. By autumn, she began visiting the house. The first time, she stood frozen in the kitchen because Maren's old yellow mug still sat beside the coffee machine. I almost put it away. Instead, I made tea. Nessa wandered through the living room, studying photographs. There was one picture of Maren laughing on a windy beach, hair blown across her face. Nessa asked if she could have a copy. I gave her the original. Months passed. My brother noticed I started answering phone calls again. I returned to Sunday dinners. I finally repainted the bedroom wall Maren had been asking me to repaint for 4 years. And every few weeks, Nessa and I visited the cemetery together. Not because grief disappeared. Because it became shared. The following spring, almost exactly 1 year after our first meeting, Nessa invited me to a small event at the family center where she worked. They were opening a room for young mothers who needed emergency counseling, legal referrals, and adoption support. On the wall outside the room was a small plaque. It read, "The Maren Room. For every mother who believes one impossible decision must define the rest of her life." I stood beneath that plaque for a long time. Nessa came beside me. She said she never got the chance to know her mother. But she had learned enough to know what she wanted to do with the story she inherited. Not repeat the pain. Use it. That was the moment I finally understood why Maren had asked me to listen. She had not left me a burden. She had left me a bridge. If this story touched your heart, if you have ever discovered that someone you loved was carrying pain you never fully understood, please take a moment to like this video, share it, subscribe to Lifeline Vibes, and tell us in the comments what part of this story stayed with you. Sometimes your words reach another person at exactly the moment they need them. And before this story ends, I have one special request. Comment the words "Love leaves a bridge" if you believe healing can begin even after it feels too late. These days, I still visit Maren's grave. But I don't always go alone. Sometimes Nessa brings flowers. Sometimes she brings coffee. Sometimes we simply stand there beneath the midday sun and talk about ordinary things. Work. Family. Weather. Life. And whenever I think back to that first morning, I remember how certain I had been that the stranger crying beside my wife's grave was about to destroy the version of Maren I had spent 3 years protecting. In a way, she did. The woman I thought I knew completely disappeared that day. But something more truthful took her place. A frightened 19-year-old girl. A mother who spent decades carrying regret. A wife who loved me but could not find the courage to reveal one of her deepest wounds. And a woman who, even after death, somehow managed to bring 2 grieving strangers together. Maren had once told me that people think second chances are about returning to what you had before. She said they aren't. A second chance is what happens when life gives you something different and asks whether you are brave enough to love it anyway. For years after she died, I thought my story had ended beside hers. Then one bright morning, I found a stranger crying at my wife's grave. She looked up. She told me someone had sent her to find me. And for the first time in 3 years, I realized that maybe being left behind did not mean I had been left with nothing. Sometimes the people we lose leave doors behind. We just don't recognize them until someone else arrives carrying the key. I can also turn this into a higher retention YouTube version with stronger suspense beats every 30-45 seconds while keeping the same emotional ending.